Good morning, my dear students. Welcome to another class on linguistics. Thank you so much for watching all the videos I have posted in this playlist. I hope it has been beneficial for you, and I really hope that you all are keeping well and are happy and safe in your homes. And I'm hoping that we will see each other pretty soon. So let's start today's topic. Today we are going to discuss Australian English. So we already discussed certain varieties of English, like we discussed British English, American English, etc. In this class, we will learn what the variety of English in Australia is like. So Australian English is also called Strine. So it's not that popular a term, it's not used that much, but it has this name, Strine. So you know that language and culture, it is related. Language is actually born out of culture. നമ്മുടെ സംസ്കാരവുമായി ബന്ധപ്പെട്ടാണ് ലാംഗ്വേജ് ഇരിക്കുന്നത്. ആൻഡ് ഇൻ ടേൺ the language actually reflects culture too. So if you hear someone speaking, you can actually sense what kind of a culture they were brought up in or what kind of a culture they belong to, something like that. So if we compare the English in Britain, United States and Australia, we can see marked differences between these three kind of languages. And of these three dialects, British English has the most confusing grammar and spelling rules. We know that because we have been educated in British English as far as possible anyway. Why British English has these confusing grammar and spelling rules? If we look at it, English language, especially British English, was attempted to be standardized in the 18th century. ഇപ്പോൾ 18th സെഞ്ച്വറിയിൽ ബ്രിട്ടീഷ് ഇംഗ്ലീഷ് സ്റ്റാൻഡർഡൈസ് ചെയ്യാനുള്ള ശ്രമങ്ങളൊക്കെ നടത്തി. Especially at this point of time, they wanted to showcase their French influence. Also, they wanted to differentiate themselves from the uneducated masses. So, British English, they wanted to establish themselves as better than the other varieties of English. So, we can see that British English actually reflects the British preoccupation with class. So, in Britain, people are concerned about the class. They want to showcase to the rest of the world that they are actually upper class and of good breeding. That is why when British English was standardized, very difficult rules and spelling conventions were applied. But Australian English, if we look at it, it's quite different from British English and American English. Because in Australian English, we see that there is a tendency towards invention. പുതിയ വാക്കുകൾ കണ്ടുപിടിക്കുക, എക്സ്പ്രഷൻസ് കണ്ടുപിടിക്കുക. So to invent new terms and expressions and idioms and all. And then there is deception. Sometimes you say something, an Australian person says something, and they might actually mean the exact opposite. So there is a tendency towards deception. And then there is a tendency towards profanity. Profanity means, swearing and bad words and all. So we will come to this point later when we discuss certain terms in Australian English. You will understand. അവർ കൂടുതലും സംസാരിക്കുമ്പോഴത്തേക്ക് കുറച്ച് എന്താ പറയുക, ഒരു തെറിവിളിയുടെ ബോർഡറിലൊക്കെ എത്തി നിൽക്കുന്ന രീതിയിലാണ്. അങ്ങനെയുള്ള കുറേ വേർഡ്സും എക്സ്പ്രഷൻസും ഒക്കെ ഉണ്ട്. ആൻഡ് യു ക്യാൻ ഓൾസോ സീ ഹ്യൂമർ ഇൻ ഓസ്ട്രേലിയൻ ഇംഗ്ലീഷ്. ഇറ്റ് ഓൾസോ ഷോസ് ദാറ്റ് ദിസ് ഇസ് എ ക്ലാസ്ലെസ് സൊസൈറ്റി. Classless society. What I mean by classless society is upper class, middle class, lower class. These kind of distinctions are not very evident in Australia and especially in the language. So Australian English shows the country to be a classless society. And then at times, Australian English is actually impossible to understand. It might be very difficult to understand. And if you listen to Australian English, you might be offended because there is no formality there. Everything is informal and casual in Australian English, most of all. So when you are in a very formal occasion and somebody is actually speaking to you in a casual way, you might get offended. There is a chance for that. So This Australian English, it actually reflects Australia's identity conflicts born out of its penal history. So Australia was actually a penal colony. ബ്രിട്ടനിലൊക്കെ കുറ്റം ചെയ്ത കുറ്റവാളികളെ നാട് കടത്തുന്ന ഒരു ഐലൻഡ് ആയിരുന്നു ഓസ്ട്രേലിയ എന്ന് പറയുന്ന കോണ്ടിനെന്റ്. So because of this history, there were a lot of criminals in Australia. Also, Australians as such, they have identity conflicts because they can't for sure say about their origins and all, whether they are born from criminals or from the native people of Australia. They are called aborigines. So there is this confusion, and we can actually see this confusion in Australian English too. And in addition, Australian English reflects the strong desire of many 19th century Australians to adopt Aboriginal names and words, particularly in rural Australia. So in Australia, there was a tendency to name your child an Aboriginal name. അപ്പോൾ ഓസ്ട്രേലിയയിലെ ട്രൈബൽ നെയിംസ്, അവിടുത്തെ ഒറിജിനൽ ആയിട്ടുള്ള അവിടുത്തെ ആൾക്കാർ അവരുടെ പേരുകളും അവരുടെ സംസ്കാരവും ഒക്കെ പ്രിസർവ് ചെയ്യാൻ ശ്രമിക്കുന്ന ഒരു ടെൻഡൻസി അവരുടെ ലാംഗ്വേജിലും റിഫ്ലക്റ്റ് ചെയ്ത് കാണുന്നുണ്ട്. Then this has actually influenced pronunciation and also a certain thing called diminutive. We'll see what diminutive is later. So that is an introduction to what Australian English is and what are the important features of Australian English. Now let's move on to certain important features in Australian English. That was just a brief introduction. So let's look at one particular feature that is different about Australian English. It had a bias towards inventiveness and deception. We already discussed a little bit of this in the introduction part. So this is because of the convict influence. I already told that Australia was a penal colony. This was the island to which the convicts of the Commonwealth were banished to. Commonwealth countries-le കുറ്റവാളികളെല്ലാം ബാനിഷ് ചെയ്യുന്ന ഒരു ഐലൻഡ് ആയിരുന്നു. So when the first fleet of ships came from all over the Commonwealth countries, 87% of the population in Australia consisted of convicts, ex-convicts, or they were of convict descent. So either they were convicts, ex-convicts, or children of convicts. So naturally, Australia's linguistic traditions, it was completely different from that of Britain or other Commonwealth countries. Then we can see this convict influence in the language because the language was full and humorous. And we can actually see that a lot of wonderful slang terms were used, and also new words and expressions were used to fit the new environment. These convicts, they had never seen any other place like this island. Australia പോലൊരു ലാൻഡ് അവർ ജീവിതത്തിൽ ഒരിടത്തും കണ്ടിട്ടില്ല. അതുകൊണ്ട് അവിടുത്തെ പുതിയ അനുഭവങ്ങൾ അത് റെഫർ ചെയ്യാൻ വേണ്ടി പുതിയ വേർഡ്സും എക്സ്പ്രഷൻസും എല്ലാം ഇവർ കോയിൻ ചെയ്തു. Also, you can see a lot of concealment in Australian English. ഒളിച്ചു വെച്ച് സംസാരിക്കുക, അല്ലെങ്കിൽ ഡബിൾ മീനിങ്, അങ്ങനെയൊക്കെയുള്ള കുറേ എലമെൻറ്റ്സ് ഒക്കെ നമുക്ക് ഓസ്ട്രേലിയൻ ഇംഗ്ലീഷിൽ കാണാം. ഓൾസോ യു ക്യാൻ സീ കോക്നി റൈമിങ് സ്ലാങ്. Lot of slang terms I already mentioned. For example, let's look at some expressions. Plates of meat. It actually meant feet, kalpadam ennullinte arthമാണ്. It could be some kind of code word or code expression used in the prison to refer to your friend's feet or something. Then again, another expression is hit the frog and toad. It meant hit the road. Let's start the car. Let's start driving. അങ്ങനെ ഒരു അർത്ഥമാണ് ഇതിന്. Also, you can see there were a lot of idioms in Australian English, and these idioms are also pretty humorous. And let's look at some of them. Mad as a cut snake. ദേഷ്യം, ഭയങ്കര ദേഷ്യം, എന്താ പറയുക, ഒരു റിവെഞ്ച് മോഡിലാണ് എങ്കിൽ പറയും യു ആർ ആസ് മാഡ് ആസ് എ കട്ട് സ്നേക്ക്. Again, you see a muscular man and you can call him, you are built like a brick shit house. So you see, instead of saying you are very muscular, it's a little bit of profanity comes here. You are actually referring to that person as a brick toilet. So that is another a humorous idiom used in Australian English. And then you can again see a lot of concealment. It can actually be seen in a word being turned upside down. ഒരു വേർഡ് തന്നെ ജംബിൾഡ് അപ്പ് ആയിട്ട് പറയുന്നു, ഒളിച്ച് കാര്യം പറയാൻ വേണ്ടിയിട്ടാണ്. For example, instead of calling someone a bastard, they used to call him a rat bag. Rat bag and bastard, some similarity is there in these two words, but the tone of the sentence has to be noted to understand the meaning. For example, you're calling somebody a rat bag, you have to call him exactly like you would call him a bastard. A rat bag, atrayum oru rathodu kuda venam parayan. So this is all about inventiveness and deception in Australian English. Another important feature of Australian English is the diminutive. So what are diminutives? So diminutives are you take a long word and you actually shorten it. You take only the first part of a word and then you add an A, O, IE or Y for the rest. For example, you take a word like afternoon. So you took only A from A and R from there, and then you put an O at the end, RO. So they actually call afternoon RO. And then again, for journalist, they use the term journo. But ഒരു വേർഡിന്റെ ആദ്യത്തെ പാർട്ട് മാത്രം എടുത്തിട്ട് പിന്നെ അതിൻ്റെ അറ്റത്തൊരു A, O, IE, Y ഇതൊക്കെ ആഡ് ചെയ്യുന്ന ഒരു ടെൻഡൻസിയാണ് ഡിമിന്യൂട്ടീവ് എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞാൽ. And there are almost 5,000 diminutives in Australian English. And when you use diminutives, it actually seems like informal. Australia actually has an egalitarian culture. They are very inclusive, they are classless, they cater for the needs of all people. So this kind of informality in language actually reflects Australia's love for egalitarianism. Another important feature of Australian English is profanity and informality. I already said that Australian English is very informal, very casual. So you can see a lot of swearing, a lot of, name calling and all, and profanity. It is there in Australia, and it actually suggests Australia's egalitarianism again. So the influence, why there is a lot of swearing and profanity, it must be because of the convict population. We already mentioned that Australia was a convict or a penal colony. So anyway, besides profanity, we in Australian English, we also see a bias towards classless society. There is no maintenance of the difference in classes like middle class, upper class, lower class or anything. That is why in Australian English, they don't use a lot of formality and titles. They don't call each other by sir, ma'am and all. Almost everyone uses first name towards each other. So even if someone is 10 or 20 years older than you can actually call them Minu or Joseph or something like that. So that is peculiar about Australians and their English. Let us now look at Australian English pronunciation and how it is different from that of British and American English. So in Australian English, you can actually see a lot of influence of Chinese language and culture. That is because there were a lot of Chinese people in Australia from 1800s onwards. They came there to look for gold. It was actually rumored that Australia has a lot of gold ores, and that is why a lot of Chinese people migrated to Australia. So you can see Chinese influence in Australian English. And when you actually listen to Australian English, it might sound a little lazy. So why it sounds lazy? It is because of Aboriginal influence. Aborigines are the real people of Australia. They are the real original people of Australia. And now they are considered to be minority anyway. Now Aborigines, they had a tendency ഓരോ സിലബിളിന്റെ അവസാനവും ഒരു വവൽ അവർ ചേർക്കും. So they had a tendency to end each syllable in a vowel sound. And when you hear speech in such a way, sentences can actually sound very smooth and lazy. And then another important thing about Australians is that they can easily adopt any other English accent. But for us, it is very difficult to speak in Australian accent. An Australian accent, again, the pronunciation differs according to ideology or gender. We'll see that. So there are mainly 3 recognized accents in Australian English. First accent is broad Australian accent. Or about 10% of Australians speak what is known as broad Australian accent. It is usually spoken by men only. So that is what I mentioned here. Gender മാറുന്നതനുസരിച്ച് accent pronunciation മാറും. As gender changes, pronunciation or accent changes. The second accent is general Australian accent. So 80% of the people speak general Australian accent. And then about 10% of the people actually speak British received pronunciation, or it is called cultivated English. So some men use received pronunciation, and the majority of Australians that speak RP are actually women. Women usually speak most, we can't say that most of the women, but those who speak RP are mostly women. Then there are some myths about Australian English. Like there is a myth that working class Australians use Cockney accent. You already learned about Cockney in British English, but that is a myth. There is no Cockney accent there. Then another myth is that people of Queensland, they speak differently to South Australians. That is another myth. Another myth is that children of migrants have distinct accents. So these are three myths about Australian pronunciation. Let's look at some differences in pronunciation between Australian, British and American terms. I'll only be reading Australian, and I won't be doing a perfect job because, as I mentioned, Australian English is very hard to copy. So hairy is actually pronounced hairy. I don't know. Then near, ask, answer, grass, dance, process, fee. It's fear. Okay, fee or fear. Then sheer is actually she, and buy is buy. I don't know exactly, but I'm just trying. Fate is fight, fight. Then tour, again tour. Then later is actually later, later. So you see what I mean? They actually tend to end a syllable in vowel. So later in the പറയുന്നതിന് later. So it seems a little lazy and casual and everything. So another thing I have actually noticed, I watch a lot of Australian shows actually, and most of the people, they when they say bed and all, they say it like bid. Okay, something like that. They don't have the A sound mostly. That's what I have noticed, but I don't know the authenticity of it all. So instead of saying I'm going to bed, they'll say I'm going to beat. Okay, so that is the end of the Australian pronunciation. Let's look at the next title. Now let's discuss Australian English spelling and how it is different from American and British spellings. So we can actually see that Australian spelling is a mix of American and British spellings. So there is a general rule, like if a word has less than 5 letters, they tend to use the British style spelling. If there are more than 5 letters, they would use American spelling. This is actually a rough rule. It's not always followed very strictly. And there is also some politics involved in the spelling of the word Labour, Labour. Let's look at the name of the party, the Australian Labour Party. Here, Labour is spelled Labor. It is because they used the American spelling in the early 20th century because they wanted to associate themselves with American libertarian ideals. But when they are using the name, using Labour, Labor, for the name of the party, actually the word Labour, Labor, the spelling is retained according to British spelling. But Labour പാർട്ടിയുടെ പേരിൽ മാത്രമേ അമേരിക്കൻ സ്പെല്ലിംഗ് ഉള്ളൂ. ലേബർ എന്ന് പറയുന്ന നൗൺ അതിന് LABOUR ആണ് യൂസ് ചെയ്യുന്നത്. They are actually following British spelling there. So that's a little bit confusing. And these are some differences. In USA, they spell center like this, C-E-N-T-E-R. In Australia and UK, C-E-N-T-R-E. Then color, in Australia it comes with a U. Organize comes with an S in Australia. Analog comes with G-U-E here in Australia. And traveled, it has double consonants, double L. So these are some differences in spelling between US and Australian English. When we come to Australian English grammar also, we can actually see a mix of British and American English in Australia. For example, in Britain, collective nouns are usually defined as plural. For example, the British would say the couple are happy. Couple means two people, right? Probably a husband and wife or a couple of friends. Something like that. So the British would say the couple are happy. But collective noun couple എന്ന് പറയുമ്പോൾ അത് plural ആയിട്ടാണ് എടുക്കുന്നത്. But in American English, they would say the couple is happy. In American English, plural or collective noun is considered as singular. So in Australia, the problem is there is no sufficient knowledge of grammar and rules of language and all. So they did not reject either British or American traditions. And you can actually see that education and all that is actually done according to the British variety of English. Whereas television and computer games and computer grammar checks and all, it's all done in American English. So we can actually see a mix of British and American English grammar in Australian English. Let's look at some differences here again. So in Australia, you'd say the class is happy. UK, class are happy. In Australia, you'd say I had forgot. Americans would say I'd forgotten. Then in US, when they would say I learned it with an ED. In Australia and UK, they use it with a T. I learned it. So these are some differences in grammar. Again, in colloquial Australian English, a plural second person pronoun. What's a second person pronoun? You. If there are more than one person, what would you say? You. You എന്ന് പറയുന്ന സാധനത്തിന്റെ പ്ലൂറലും യു തന്നെയാണ്. Plural form of you is you. But in Australia, they have actually found this one, you guys. If there are more than one people who are being addressed, you would address them as you guys. Okay. Then Australians, they have actually a tendency to attribute gender to inanimate nouns. ഇപ്പോൾ ഒബ്ജക്ട്സിനൊക്കെ അവർ ഒരു ജെൻഡർ കൊടുക്കാറുണ്ട്. ഫോർ എക്സാമ്പിൾ they use she to refer to their car or boat. ഓക്കെ, അവരുടെ കാർ, ബോട്ട്, ഇതിനൊക്കെ അവർ she എന്നൊക്കെ വിളിക്കാറുണ്ട്. Also, they never actually use the word whom. Wherever whom is used, they tend to use who. Again, they tend to use me instead of I or my. For example, if I am saying Tommy, Rachel and me, they use this me instead of Tommy, Rachel and I. British English la ingeneyaanu use cheyyunnathu, Tommy, Rachel and I, whereas Australian English prefers Tommy, Rachel and me. Again, in British English, they'd say he was angry at my scoring the goal. In Australian English, they'd say he was angry at me scoring the goal. So instead of my, Australians would use me. Me instead of I or my in sentences. So that is another important feature of grammar. Let's now look at the vocabulary in Australian English. And Australian vocabulary is extremely rich and vast and mainly inventive. I already mentioned that they used to invent new words because they had really new experiences in this new island they came to. So it is in vocabulary that you find the most differences between Australian English and other forms of English. Let's look at some important distinctions. So in Australian English, you'd say aluminium instead of the American form aluminum. Even my husband says aluminum. I thought that it was a mistake on his part, but now I understand that Americans actually pronounce it or have this word aluminum. Even this computer was actually keeping on correcting me that aluminium is wrong because the computer is American, obviously. Anyway, and in Australian English, they'd say mobile phone instead of American cell phone. And Australians would say anti-clockwise, where Americans would say counterclockwise. Australians would say petrol instead of American gasoline. And Australians had a bonnet in the car, whereas Americans have hood in the car. And Australians take holidays and Americans take vacations. So these are some important distinctions between Australia and American English vocabulary. Then I already mentioned that Australia had a wonderful list of idioms, various and vivid, colorful idioms. For example, if you see a disaster, you would call it a shit show. So you actually notice that they have a preference to use words like shit always. That's again proof of their profanity. Then you say no chance. അങ്ങനെ പറയുന്നതിന് പകരം bees dick of a chance. Then you say that someone is clever. Then an idiom is used. He didn't come down in the last shower. ഇന്നലത്തെ മഴയിൽ പൊട്ടിമുളച്ചുണ്ടായതല്ല എന്ന് മലയാളത്തിൽ പറയില്ലേ. That's the same thing. And this is a mess എന്ന് പറയുന്നതിന് പകരം this is a dog's breakfast. So these are some Australian idioms that are used. And then there are a lot of similes were used. ഉപമകൾ ധാരാളമായിട്ട് ഉപയോഗിക്കാറുണ്ടായിരുന്നു. For example, if you want to call someone crazy, you can call them, you're as mad as a gum tree full of gallus. Again, you want to call someone else crazy as you're as mad as a cut snake. Again, muscular person is you are built like a brick shit house. Again, when someone is thirsty, you can say, I am as dry as a dead dingo's donga. ദാഹിക്കുന്നു എന്ന് പറയുന്നതാണ്. So these are some Australian similes that are used. So you can see where the humorous element comes in, right? Again, some rhetorical sayings were also used in Australian English. Is a duck's arse watertight? Okay, this is a rhetorical saying in Australian English, and there are many words which are unique to Australia and certain slang terms also. Let's look at some of these terms. I have actually quite a list of terms. You can learn a couple or 4 or 5 from them and write for your exam, but it's actually fun to know the meanings of these words, right? So a bludger is actually a lazy person riding off someone else's hard work. So bludger is ഒരു ഓസ് എന്നൊക്കെ നമ്മൾ മലയാളത്തിൽ പറയില്ലേ, അങ്ങനെയുള്ള ഒരാളെയാണ് ബ്ലഡ്ജർ എന്ന് വിളിക്കുന്നത്. ആൻഡ് എ വൗസർ ഇസ് സമ്മൺ ഹു മിസ്റ്റേക്സ് എ വേൾഡ് ആസ് എ പ്രിസൺ ആൻഡ് themselves as the warden. You might have somebody in your classroom who is like that. When the teacher is not there, they become all bossy and they find, they're quite annoying. Okay. And then there is another word, larrikin. Larrikin means an iconic individual that sails close to the wind in regards to rules. Rule break ചെയ്തു ചെയ്തില്ല എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞ് നിൽക്കുന്ന ഒരു ആളാണ് larrikin. Usually this word is used to refer to street criminals. And then amber is actually beer or lager. And then Aussie is an Australian person, you know that. Then drongo is actually a word used for idiot or moron. So you got a new word, a swear word, drongo. And then fair dinkum means true, genuine. സത്യമായിട്ടും പറയാണ് fair dinkum. And then gander is to have a look at something. Okay, gander, ഇതൊന്ന് വന്ന് നോക്കിക്കേ എന്ന് പറയാണ്. Then some other words and expressions are, instead of saying good day or good morning, Australians tend to say good day. Good day. I actually watched this YouTube channel, Living Big in a Tiny House, and there's this guy who actually talks. He goes to these small houses and he interviews the people there, and he always says, "Good day, mate," something like that. It's actually really nice to listen to such people. And then give it a whirl means give it a try. ഒന്ന് try ചെയ്ത് നോക്ക്. Then huru is goodbye. Oldies are your parents. Pom or pommy means a British person. Reckon is used to mean absolutely. Instead of saying absolutely, I'd say reckon. Then ripper is actually a similar word to great, fantastic, or Awesome. That's ripper. Okay. Then she's apple means it is fine or it will be okay. She is apple. Okay. Then tucker means any kind of food. Okay. It must be chapati, it must be pizza, everything is tucker. Yabber means to talk or to chat. These are some Australian words or slang terms. It's very unique to Australia. So now you have got a wonderful idea about Australian English. And again, I have added some more words, a list of words here. Again, absolutely, reckon. Then accident is a prang in Australia. Afternoon is arvo. We already discussed that. Aggressive becomes aggro. Alcohol becomes grog. American becomes yank. Angry becomes burko. Australian is Aussie or strine. Biscuit is a bicky in Australia. Cheap wine is called plonk in Australia. Chicken is called chook. It's actually, I watch MasterChef Australia. They always call it chook. Initially I thought it was an entirely different bird. Again, criminal is a bush ranger. Dock worker is a wharfie. Drunk means pissed. English person is called a pommy. We already discussed that. Excellent is ace. Okay, you do an excellent work. I say ace. Okay. Then farm is usually called a station. Field becomes a paddock. Food is a tucker. Go away is shove off. Okay. Then hi, instead of hi, they say good day, mate. Okay, something like that. Then horses are called neddies. Idiot. These are some words for idiot. Dill and drongo. Kangaroo is called a roo. It's not kangaroo, first of all. It's a kangaroo. Okay. Kangaroo is shortened to roo. Lavatory becomes loo. It's bathroom or toilet. Mosquito becomes mozzie. Nonsense becomes piffle. Pub meal becomes counter meal. Remote desert country becomes never never. Shut up becomes belt up. Soldier becomes digger. Tea kettle becomes billy. Teacher becomes chalky because we always use chalk, right? So you can call me chalky. No, don't. Okay. To complain is to grizzle in Australia. To have a look is to gander. We already discussed that. Underpants, for men's underpants are called jocks in Australia. That's where jokey actually comes from, I guess. Then water hole is a billabong. നമ്മുടെ കിണർ അങ്ങനെയുള്ള ചെറിയ. Then well done becomes good on ya. Worthless person is a dongo. Okay, so these are some important words. It's actually fun to learn Australian English, I guess. And again, I am giving you some more interesting Australian slang here. Journo is a journalist. Sheila is a girl. Any girl is called a Sheila. Even in Malayalam, we have such a tendency, right? Like Pomone Dinesha, അങ്ങനെയൊക്കെയുള്ള terms ഒക്കെ വരുന്നുണ്ട്. Then there's this term beju. Beju actually means an old man in some parts of Kerala. I actually don't know where it is practiced, but you know. Then shashi. Shashi means fool, something like that. That's a sense in which you use it. It does not necessarily mean that a person named Shashi is a fool. I did not say that. Then McDonald's is Macca's in Australia. Yabber to talk. Beer becomes a coldie in Australia. To work is yaka in Australian slang. So this has brought us to the end of this class on Australian English. I hope you understood it perfectly and you had fun learning about Australian English. I hope this class was extremely beneficial for you. Let me know in comments below and subscribe to the channel and share it with your friends if they also need help with this topic. And thank you so much for your attention, listening till the end. Have a good day. Bye.